let's talk about Imaro by Charles R. Saunders. So this is the first book in a series about Imaro. This one is called Imaro, the others are called different things. This is, I guess, it's 5 novellas set into 2 parts. Charles R. Saunders began to write the Imaro stories in the 70s, and they're published, I think, at the start of the 80s in a single volume. And then this is the 2006 reprint from Nightshade Books. Now, Saunders explicitly created Imaro to be, Saunders being an African American, loved Robert E. Howard, loved Conan, but as I discussed in my Conan review, sometimes found the depiction, the universally stupid depiction of black people in Howard's Conan stories upsetting, in the sense that when you're reading it and you can't recognise a caricature, you can't recognise an image or view of you or your people, just as if you were religious, you might find the constant depictions, negative depictions of religion in a lot of media pretty frustrating. He found that difficult, and he thought, well, I love these books, and I want to write stories like them, but I'm going to make them stories that I can read, And he does explain this in the his foreword to this, revisiting Imaro, to the reprint, and he says, Imaro would be the anti-Tarzan, and the setting in which his story unfolded would be an alternate world Africa rather than an imaginary prehistoric era of the Earth we know, as was the case in Howard's Hyborian Age and Tolkien's Middle-earth. Imaro's Africa, which I named Nyambani, would serve as an antidote to the negative stereotypes about the so-called dark continent that crept, advertently and inadvertently, into the fantasy world of far too many other writers. He obviously name-checks Tarzan there, but the comparison for all kinds of reasons, basically these are barbarian stories in the kind of genre sense, not in the moral sense. The comparison is Conan, and certainly the discussions he has elsewhere directly compare Imaro to Conan. Tarzan is really a very different kind of figure in lots of ways. The Africa maybe is the comparison, that Tarzan lives in a version of our Africa in Burroughs' books, whereas Nyambani is this fantasy Africa, which is a tribute to the various folkways and cultures and stories of historical Africa. So Imaro lives in the Nyambani. It's fantasy Africa, many different cultures, religions, locations, people groups, and let's talk about the strengths, and we'll spin off from that. 3 big strengths, I think, of this book. The world building is the first. So the world building is very good. Saunders references he references Hyboria and says, in one sense, it's not like Hyboria, but in another way, it is like Hyboria, in the sense that, particularly because Howard argued for cultural recurrence, the idea that things kind of went in cycles. So what was then is similar to what is now, and it's recognisable and echoes. And Nyambani has some resemblance to that, in that he creates a fantasy Africa that matches Howard's Europe and Middle East in terms of an interesting cultural distinction, or something perhaps like an even better comparison, like Lois McMaster Bujold's World of 5 Gods, which I have reviewed on this channel, or one of the books, Curse of Chalion, I have reviewed on this channel before, which is one of the more interesting fantasy Europes out there. The cultures are textured, they are deep, and in this book, this particular one, the first one, Saunders takes us from fantasy Swahili peoples through jungle tribes to cities more like those are on the Zanzibar-influenced eastern coast of Africa, and you see many different groups across there of nomadic tribes, jungle tribes that are settled with particular rhythms of life, mercenary bands, cities, all kinds of cultures across Nyambani, and the feel of each of those peoples, those locales, each of their religions, their food habits, their cultural traditions, all of it is great, very compelling, feels real. In fact, I'd say even more so in lots of ways than Howard's Hyboria. A good comparison is maybe Bujold in terms of the relative texture and granularity of the culture. Second, the action here is quick, it's compelling, it's fun to read, Saunders is not as great a writer of prose and action as Howard is. Howard had a peculiar talent for that, I think perhaps never equalled. But he evidently learned a lot from Howard, and the action here is great. When Imaro, you can see on the front what he's doing there. When he gets into the action, Imaro is an exciting and engaging character, and the battle scenes never feel forced or overlong. And third, character. Imaro is a real character. He's maybe a better character than Conan. He has much more interior life. He has a background and a future in a way that's more palpable than with Conan. Even though you start reading Conan, if you do it chronologically in publication order, and you know he becomes king, everything is disconnected there. There's no sense of progression through Conan's career or his mindset or his development. Everything is very much kind of compacted into each story. But with Imaro, you see an arc and a development of a character. Rather than, there's a thing that he also doesn't represent an ideal form of the savage, which for Howard, Conan does. Rather, Saunders has a more humane vision, and Imaro is frankly the savage side of that humane vision. Not in a idyllic or utopian sense, where in a weird way that's what Howard thinks utopia is, but rather one kind of human, one form of the human spirit. He is an articulation of that. Imaro also has a wide range of relationships. He has friendships, he has rivalries, he has romance, he has an important maternal relationship. They're all done in a realist fashion. He's rounded, he's a compelling character. He's still a terrifying force from nature, but he's a real character in person as well. And maybe there a comparison that comes to my mind is the Lankmar novels, where Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, particularly in the very first novella chronologically in terms of setting time, you see them build relationships and know people, and you see their relationship later with the wizards they work with. So that idea that there are relationships that matter beyond the individual story and that impact Imaro through his life, that's very important. And of those three categories, I'd probably say that Saunders is stronger than Howard in two of them, in character and in world building. I honestly don't know which author is better. Howard is much more primal, his prose is incredible, as I say, perhaps never to be equalled, and perhaps very specifically, his depiction of horror is stronger. Howard was good at showing decadence and horror. That was something which evidently appealed to his pulp mind, and you see that hinted at elsewhere in his works that aren't Conan as well, and very similar to his friend Lovecraft, of course, though sometimes for different reasons. Saunders is less strong at that side of it, though he does do some of the pulp horror. But Saunders is, I think, the necessary comparison to Howard. And I recommend the Imaro series highly to anyone who likes Conan, or who likes the idea of a fantasy Africa that's compelling and interesting. The books can be hard to find. Some of them are on Saunders' Lulu. He died last year, but the Lulu is still active. I don't believe the first two books, though, Imaro and The Quest for Kush, are there. You might need to look around for them. It'll be easier in America than it is in Europe. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Imaro. If you have read any of these books, tell me what you think in the comments below. Until next time.